Why are you here in an Uber Tara? What happened to the BMW 7 Series I gave you for your 25th birthday? My grandmother Beatrice asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing, as we sat in the private dining room of a five-star restaurant in downtown Chicago. Before I could even open my mouth, my mother Patricia took a casual sip of her expensive Cabernet and sighed. Brittany needed it more. Tara is single, so she can just take an Uber. Luxury cars are for people with real families. The absolute silence that followed was deafening, but it was nothing compared to what my grandmother did next. My name is Tara, and I am 33 years old. For my entire life, I have been the invisible bank account for a family that values status over basic human decency. They thought they could walk all over me because I kept my wealth quiet. They had no idea I was about to legally dismantle their entire fake lives. Before I tell you how a stolen car turned into a federal fraud case, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with toxic relatives who mistake your silence for weakness. We were gathered at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in Chicago's River North District to celebrate my grandmother's 78th birthday. Beatrice is a legend. She built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up with nothing but grit and a brilliant mind. She is also the only person in my family who ever saw my true potential. While my parents, Patricia and Richard, were busy grooming my younger sister Brittany to marry rich and look pretty, Beatrice was the one slipping me books on finance and investment strategies. I arrived at the restaurant exactly on time, stepping out of a standard rideshare vehicle. I was dressed elegantly, but understated in a tailored navy suit that did not scream for attention. That was always my strategy. I manage a venture capital firm worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but my family still treats me like the awkward, unlovable middle manager they assumed I became. To them, I was just Tara, the boring, single workaholic who lived in a plain apartment and existed solely to absorb their financial burdens. My parents were already seated when I walked in. My mother wore a designer dress that I knew for a fact was purchased on a credit card carrying a 25% interest rate. My father, Richard, sported a fake Rolex and the arrogant posture of a man who loved playing pretend. They barely acknowledged me as I took my seat next to my grandmother. That was when Beatrice noticed my arrival method. Her question about the BMW 7 Series cut through the pretentious classical music playing in the background. She had bought me that car right after I secured my first major investment deal. It was a beautiful machine, but more importantly, it was a symbol of her belief in me. Hearing my mother casually dismiss my ownership of a six-figure vehicle as if it were a shared family umbrella made my blood boil. Brittany needed it more. Tara is single, so she can just take an Uber. Luxury cars are for people with real families. Patricia said it so smoothly, swirling the wine in her glass, completely unbothered by the sheer audacity of her statement. I looked at my mother, marveling at her delusion. This was the same woman who 5 years ago manipulated me into taking on $50,000 of her credit card debt, because according to her, Brittany needed a flawless credit score to secure an apartment in an upscale neighborhood. I paid it off, but I learned my lesson. I stopped sharing my financial reality with them. Because of my silence, they assumed I had stagnated. They assumed I was weak. They assumed my property was their property. Before my grandmother could unleash the fury I saw brewing in her eyes, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open. In walked my 30-year-old sister Brittany, wearing a faux fur coat and carrying a designer bag that probably cost more than her entire savings account. She had never held a steady job in her life, preferring to call herself an aspiring socialite. Beside her was her husband, Terrence. He is 32, African-American, and a highly ambitious real estate broker. Terrence always carried himself with a specific kind of swagger, representing a man desperate to prove he belonged in the upper echelons of Chicago society. Brittany had hooked him by selling a massive lie. She convinced him she was the heiress to my grandmother's real estate empire, a wealthy socialite with unlimited resources. Terrence bought the illusion completely unaware that the designer clothes on his wife's back were funded by predatory loans and my parents' dwindling retirement accounts. Brittany strutted over to the table, completely ignoring the tension in the room. She reached into her expensive handbag and dramatically tossed a set of familiar keys onto the pristine white tablecloth. The heavy BMW key fob landed with a sharp clatter right next to my water glass. "Thanks for the old car." Brittany smirked, her perfectly glossed lips curving into a sneer of pure entitlement. "I mean, it is a little outdated and boring for my taste, but Terrence took it to a shop and got it wrapped in a matte black decal. It actually looks somewhat decent now. You really should not have kept a luxury car sitting around just to drive to your depressing little office. It was a waste of a good engine." Terrence nodded confidently, adjusting his expensive tie. "Yeah, appreciate it, Tara. Brittany told me you guys bought it for her as a wedding anniversary gift. It drives like a dream." Let us pause and examine that for a moment. Not only had my parents orchestrated the theft of my vehicle from my secure parking garage using a spare key I foolishly left at their house years ago, but Brittany had actively lied to her husband, claiming the car was a gift to her. Terrence stood there puffed up with pride, entirely oblivious to the fact that he was driving a stolen vehicle. He thought he had married into a family of generous millionaires. He had no idea he had married into a family of desperate debt-ridden frauds who stole from their own daughter. I did not yell. I did not cry. Years of sitting across the negotiation table from ruthless corporate sharks had taught me the power of absolute stillness. I looked at the key fob resting on the white linen. Then I looked at my sister, who was already signaling a waiter to bring her a menu, acting as if she owned the world. My father beamed at her, proudly supporting the illusion. They thought they had won. They thought the boring single sister would just swallow the humiliation to keep the peace at a family birthday dinner. They relied on my usual strategy of walking away from their drama. But they miscalculated terribly. They did not realize that the Tara they bullied 10 years ago no longer existed. The Tara sitting at that table managed a $500 million venture capital fund. And more importantly, they did not realize the specific legal trap they had just walked into. I slowly picked up my napkin and placed it on my lap. I could feel my grandmother Beatrice beside me, her posture rigid with a cold, calculating fury. She and I shared the same shark instincts, and I knew exactly what she was about to do. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The silence in the private dining room was absolute. The clatter of the heavy BMW key fob against the table had faded, leaving only the soft hum of classical music from the restaurant speakers. My parents sat with smug satisfaction, expecting me to shrink away as I always did. Brittany was busy checking her reflection in a silver spoon. Terrence stood tall, adjusting his expensive suit, waiting for my gratitude. But my grandmother Beatrice did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She did not even look angry. Instead, she reached for her linen napkin, elegantly dabbed the corners of her mouth, and placed it back on the table with calculated precision. "Patricia," my grandmother began, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "You just committed corporate theft and federal tax fraud." My mother froze. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Richard let out a loud, forced laugh, waving his hand in the air. "Oh, Mother, please," my father scoffed. "Stop being so dramatic. We just reallocated a family vehicle. Tara never drives it anyway. She practically lives at her office. We transferred it to Brittany because she and Terrence have a lot of client meetings. It is keeping it in the family." Beatrice leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her eyes locked onto my father with the intensity of a predator cornering its prey. "Richard," she said coldly, "I did not buy Tara a personal vehicle for her 25th birthday. I transferred a corporate asset to a limited liability company. That BMW is registered under a financial holding group. It is not personal property. It is a depreciating asset used for corporate tax deductions." My parents stared at her blankly. They were so accustomed to living on credit and pretending to understand wealth that the actual mechanics of corporate finance completely escaped them. But Terrence understood. I saw the exact second the reality of the situation hit him. As a licensed real estate broker, he knew exactly what a holding company was, and he knew the legal nightmares associated with mishandling corporate assets. Wait a minute, Terrence said, his voice suddenly tight. He looked down at the keys on the table as if they had caught fire. What do you mean it is a corporate asset? I decided it was time to step in. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip before looking directly at my brother-in-law. The car belongs to HV Holdings. I explained, my voice perfectly calm. That is a venture capital firm. I am the chief executive officer of that firm. That vehicle is registered to the Corporation for Executive Transport. Because you took it without corporate authorization, you are currently in possession of stolen commercial property. And because my parents apparently claimed it was a gift to avoid paying taxes, they have triggered a federal tax fraud violation with the Internal Revenue Service. Brittany rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. Stop using big words to try and scare us, Tara. You are just mad because I got the nice car and you have to take an Uber. Mom and Dad gave it to me. They signed the paper. Terrence turned to his wife, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. Brittany, what paper did they sign? You told me this car was a direct gift from your parents. You told me they bought it for you brand new to celebrate our anniversary. I never said brand new. Brittany deflected, her voice pitching higher. I said it was new to us, and Mom and Dad had the spare key, so they just gave it to me. It is fine, Terrence. Tara is just being a jealous loser like always. It is not fine, Brittany. Terrence slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. He was a man who had fought tooth and nail to build his real estate career, facing endless hurdles as a black man in a fiercely competitive, predominantly white industry. His real estate license was his entire livelihood. He could not afford a single legal misstep, let alone grand theft auto. He looked at my parents, his expression hardening into pure anger. You told me you owned that car. You told me you transferred the title cleanly. I took that vehicle to a custom auto shop and spent $4,000 wrapping it in a matte decal. I put my own credit card down for that transaction. Patricia waved her hand dismissively, her face flushed with cheap wine and embarrassment. Oh, Terrence, calm down. It is just a family dispute. Tara is just being difficult. We will just have her sign the title over tomorrow morning and make it official. Right, Tara. You will just sign the paper and we can all move on from this silly misunderstanding. I smiled at my mother. It was the kind of smile that rarely reached my eyes. A smile I reserved for hostile takeovers. I cannot sign the title over to you, Mom. Doing so would require a board resolution from my company and a declaration of asset liquidation. Furthermore, since Terrence just admitted to altering a corporate vehicle by wrapping it without authorization, my company is legally obligated to file a police report for vandalism and destruction of corporate property. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You will do no such thing. You will not call the police on your own family. I am your father, and I demand that you sign that car over to your sister right now. You have plenty of money to buy another one. I leaned back in my chair, matching my father's rage with absolute ice. You do not demand anything from me, Richard. You used a spare key to enter my secure residential parking garage. You drove away in a vehicle that does not belong to you. You handed it to your favored daughter to maintain the illusion that you are wealthy benefactors. You are not wealthy. You are thieves. Terrence stepped away from the table, entirely distancing himself from Brittany. He looked at his wife with utter disgust. You lied to me. You sat in our living room and told me your parents were unloading one of their extra luxury cars because they bought a new one. You let me drive a stolen car to client meetings for the past 3 days. Do you have any idea what would happen to my broker license if I got pulled over in a stolen corporate vehicle? Baby, please, Brittany, whined, reaching out to grab his arm. It is not stolen. It is just a technicality. Tara is just being a horrible sister. She will fix it. She always fixes things for us. I am not fixing anything this time, I stated clearly, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. By tomorrow morning, my corporate legal team will report the vehicle as stolen. The police will trace it back to you, Terrence, since you took it to a body shop and left your paper trail. Terrence yanked his arm out of Brittany's grasp. His breathing was heavy, his eyes darting between my parents and his wife, as the grand illusion he had married into shattered into a million jagged pieces. He finally saw them for what they were. They were not high society aristocrats, they were desperate grifters. "I am leaving," Terrence announced, his voice dangerously low. He pointed a finger at Brittany. "Do not follow me back to the apartment. I need to figure out how I am going to keep myself out of federal prison because of your insane family." He turned on his heel and marched out of the private dining room without looking back. Brittany stood there, her mouth hanging open in shock as the door swung shut behind her husband. The first crack in their perfect facade had just split wide open. My grandmother picked up her wine glass, took a leisurely sip, and smiled. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, cutting off the sound of Terrence's retreating footsteps. For a moment, the only noise in the private dining room was the ragged, panicked breathing of my sister. Brittany stared at the closed door, her perfect facade crumbling as the reality of her husband's departure settled over her. Then the shock evaporated and the room exploded. Richard, my father, lunged out of his chair, his face twisted into a mask of pure crimson rage. He slammed his fist down onto the pristine white tablecloth with such violent force that my mother's wineglass tipped over. Dark red liquid spilled across the linen, soaking into the fabric like blood, but nobody cared to clean it up. "Look what you did!" Richard roared, his voice echoing off the expensive wood-paneled walls. "You drove him away. You ruined your sister's marriage over a piece of metal. You are a cold-blooded monster, Tara. How dare you sit there and threaten your own flesh and blood with the police and the IRS?" Patricia immediately jumped to her husband's side. She pointed a manicured finger at my face, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate kind of hatred. "You have always been this way," Patricia shrieked. "You have always been so insanely jealous of Brittany. Just because she is beautiful and married to a wonderful, successful man, you had to find a way to destroy her happiness. You are a bitter, unlovable spinster who uses complicated legal jargon to try and sound important. You think throwing around words like tax fraud makes you powerful, but you are just a sad, lonely woman trying to drag your own sister down to your miserable level." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or rush to defend myself against their pathetic insults. I simply picked up a clean napkin and carefully wiped a stray drop of spilled wine that had managed to reach the base of my water glass. The sheer contrast between their chaotic screaming and my absolute stillness seemed to infuriate my father even more. "Do not ignore us when we are speaking to you," Richard bellowed, taking a threatening step toward my side of the table. "You are going to call Terrence right now. You are going to tell him this was all a terrible misunderstanding. You are going to sign that car title over to Brittany, and you are going to beg for her forgiveness. You are nothing but a low-level corporate drone who got lucky enough to be given a company car. Do not act like you own the place. I am your father, and I demand that you fix this mess immediately." I folded the napkin and placed it gently on the table. Then I looked up, meeting my father's furious gaze with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. "You fundamentally misunderstand the situation, Richard," I said, my voice dangerously soft, forcing them to quiet down just to hear me. "You think I am a low-level employee who was handed a set of keys as a perk. You think HV Holdings is just a faceless corporation where I clock in and push papers for a meager salary. You think I am using my employer's property to intimidate you." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I smoothed the front of my tailored suit, asserting my physical presence in the room. "Let me clarify exactly who you are dealing with," I stated, enunciating every single syllable. "HV Holdings is not my employer. It is my creation. It is a venture capital firm that I built from the ground up entirely on my own. I do not answer to a board of directors. I do not ask for permission to use corporate assets. I am the sole founder and the chief executive officer of the entire financial group." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My father froze mid-stride, his mouth hanging slightly open as his brain struggled to process the words I had just spoken. Patricia dropped her hand, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat, as if she had just seen a ghost. Brittany stopped her dramatic sobbing, her tear-streaked face staring at me in total bewilderment. "That is impossible." Richard stammered, his aggressive posture deflating instantly. "You do not have that kind of money. You live in a basic apartment. You never talk about your job. You are lying to try and scare us." My grandmother Beatrice chuckled from her seat, a low rumbling sound of pure satisfaction. "My granddaughter has never lied a day in her life, Richard," Beatrice said, her voice laced with sharp mockery. "She simply chose not to share her financial reality with a pack of greedy parasites." Tara manages over $500 million in investment assets. She owns office buildings, tech startups, and commercial real estate across 3 different states. She did not buy that BMW to commute to a cubicle. That car is a microscopic rounding error on her balance sheet. I watched the color drain completely from my mother's face. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked, the daughter she had deemed a failure, the daughter she had stolen from, was a multimillionaire CEO holding massive financial power. Their entire worldview, built on the illusion of their own superiority, had just been pulverized. "You," Patricia gasped, her voice barely a whisper now. "You are the CEO. You own all of it." "Yes, Patricia," I replied, stepping around the table to stand directly in front of them. "And because I am the CEO, I am legally bound by fiduciary duty to protect my corporate assets. When you used a stolen spare key to drive a registered commercial vehicle out of my private facility, you did not just steal from your daughter. You stole from a $500 million financial institution. My legal team does not care about your family drama. They only care about asset recovery and prosecuting theft." Brittany suddenly pushed past our parents, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my jacket. "Tara, if you are that rich, then you can just buy me another car," Brittany cried out, her entitlement blinding her to the danger she was in. "You can give me the money to fix things with Terrence. If you have $500 million, you can give me a few million to pay off my debts. Terrence left me because he thinks we are poor. You have to save my marriage. You have to write me a check right now." I looked down at my sister's hand gripping my sleeve. I felt no pity. I felt no sisterly obligation. I only saw a parasite demanding a host. I reached up and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. "I do not have to do anything for you, Brittany," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room like a judge's gavel. "I used my wealth to build an empire. You used my wealth to build a lie. Your husband did not leave you because he thinks you are poor. He left you because he finally realized you are a fraud. And the absolute worst part for you is that I am not going to spend a single cent to save you from the consequences of your own actions." Patricia gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "How can you be so heartless? We are your family. We raised you. We sacrificed everything to give you a good life. And this is how you repay us. By letting your sister's marriage fall apart over a car. You are standing there talking about police and investigations when you should be writing a check to fix this." I stepped closer to my mother, closing the physical distance between us until she was forced to look up into my eyes. "Sacrificed. You want to talk about sacrifices, Patricia? Let us talk about my college fund, the one Grandma Beatrice set up for both of us when we were children." I turned to Brittany, who was still sniffling dramatically, trying to play the victim. "Do you remember when I was 18? You two sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I needed to sign a waiver. You looked me straight in the eye and said the family business was going through a tough time and you needed my tuition money to keep a roof over our heads. I believed you. I gave up my dream school. I went to a local community college and worked night shifts as a waitress to pay my own way. But the business was not failing, was it? You took my entire college fund and used it to pay for Brittany's out-of-state tuition at an expensive private university, because she threw a massive tantrum about wanting the full sorority experience. Richard puffed out his chest, trying to regain his shattered authority. We made a financial decision for the household. You were always smart enough to get scholarships and figure things out on your own. Your sister needed the extra support to succeed. It was an investment in her future. Support. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the mahogany walls of the dining room. You call it support. I call it theft. Just like what happened 5 years ago. I pointed a finger directly at my father, forcing him to shrink back slightly. 5 years ago, you came to my tiny studio apartment crying. You said the bank was going to foreclose on the family home. You begged me to take out personal loans and max out credit cards under my name because your credit was completely destroyed. $50,000. I took on $50,000 of high-interest unsecured debt when I was barely making ends meet trying to launch my first software company. I ate ramen noodles for 2 years. I worked 20-hour days and slept on the floor of my office just to avoid defaulting and destroying my own credit score. I did that to save your home. Patricia stepped in front of Richard, her face red with indignant fury. Her mask of high society elegance had completely melted away, revealing the ugly, greedy truth underneath. You are the older sister. It is your duty to help your family. You had to sacrifice. We did not use that money for the house. Brittany needed capital to start a business. She had a brilliant idea for a lifestyle brand, and she needed seed money. You were just sitting in front of a computer all day. She was out there networking and building a public image. Networking. I repeated the word slowly, letting the absolute absurdity of it wash over the room. I looked at Brittany taking in her designer dress, the pristine blowout, and the diamond bracelet sparkling on her wrist. Is that what we are calling it now? Starting a business by going to luxury spas and buying designer bags. Brittany flushed a deep, ugly red. I was building my brand image, Tara. You have to spend money to make money. You do not understand how the influencer industry works. You spent $12,000 on a Hermes Birkin bag within 48 hours of the loan clearing into your account. I stated, rattling off the facts with surgical precision. You spent another $8,000 on a 2-week retreat in Tulum because you claimed you needed spiritual alignment before launching your company. You bought first-class tickets, drank vintage champagne, and stayed in 5-star oceanfront resorts. You never registered a limited liability company. You never filed a business plan. You literally blew $50,000 of my debt on a shopping spree to pretend you were a rich influencer on Instagram. And while you were sipping margaritas on a beach, I was fielding calls from debt collectors. I continued, my voice rising with a cold, calculated fury. I was negotiating payment plans with banks. I was sacrificing my own sleep and sanity to cover the monthly minimums on cards you maxed out. You stole my future to fund your vacation, and you both enabled it. I glared at my parents. You lied to my face about a foreclosure to fund her vanity project. Patricia crossed her arms, her chin jutting out defensively, refusing to back down. She was young. She made a mistake. But she deserved to experience the world and build her network. You were always so rigid, so focused on numbers. We knew you would figure out a way to pay it off. You always do. And look at you now, you are rich. You manage hundreds of millions of dollars. Why are you still crying over $50,000 from 5 years ago? It clearly did not ruin your life. It did not ruin my life because I refused to let you drag me down with you. I fired back, the absolute lack of shame in my mother's voice fueling my resolve. I survived despite you, not because of you. You look at me and you see a safety net. You see a bank account that exists solely to clean up your messes. You used the excuse of family to bleed me dry. You told me I had to be the responsible one, the mature one, the one who stepped up. But all that meant was that I was the one who had to suffer, so Brittany could play dress-up. I took a step closer to my mother, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. But I took that $50,000 of debt and I turned it into a lesson. I learned exactly how ruthless I needed to be to survive in a world where even my own parents were trying to bankrupt me. I took the anger I felt toward you, and I channeled it into every single business deal I ever made. I built a massive financial empire using the exact same ruthlessness you taught me. You stole my car because you thought I was still that same girl who would just sign over her rights to keep the peace. You thought you could take a commercial vehicle and hand it to Brittany just like you handed her my college fund and my credit score. You thought I would just write it off as a loss to protect the family image. But those days are over. Richard shook his head in disbelief, clinging to his patriarchal delusion. You are holding a grudge over the past. We did what we had to do for the survival of this family. We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us your respect and your compliance. I owe you nothing. I said, my voice razor sharp, slicing through his entitlement. Respect is earned. You lost mine the day you looked me in the eye. Lied about losing our home and watched me drown in debt. So your golden child could buy luxury shoes. You chose your favorite daughter a long time ago. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. Brittany wiped a tear from her cheek, her face contorted with pure hatred. You are just a sociopath, Tara. You have no heart. You care more about money and revenge than your own family. I care about justice. I corrected her, refusing to break eye contact. And right now, justice means watching you face the real world without my wallet to protect you. Richard took a deep breath, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of patriarchal dominance. He pointed a thick finger at my face, his voice dropping into a menacing growl that he probably thought was intimidating. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat! Richard snarled. If you dare to pick up that phone and call the police about that car, I will destroy you. I will erase your name from the family brokerage firm by tomorrow morning. You think you are so smart with your venture capital nonsense, but you are still listed as a consultant on my payroll. I will fire you. I will make sure you are blacklisted in the Chicago commercial real estate sector. You will lose your job, your reputation, and your safety net. You will be left with absolutely nothing, and I will make sure no one in this city ever hires you again. The sheer audacity of his threat hung in the air. He genuinely believed he still held the cards. He genuinely thought his crumbling mid-level brokerage firm had the power to intimidate a woman who routinely liquidated companies 10 times his size before her morning coffee. I did not gasp. I did not argue. I simply reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face with a cold blue light as I tapped into my secure encrypted email server. I scrolled past acquisition term sheets and international wire transfer confirmations until I found the exact legal document I was looking for. I looked up from the screen, meeting my father's furious gaze with a look of absolute clinical detachment. Are you going to fire me, Richard? I asked, my voice echoing with pure, unfiltered mockery. That is a fascinating threat, but I am extremely curious about the logistical execution of that plan. Tell me exactly how you plan to fire anyone from a company that legally no longer exists. My father's hand froze in mid-air. The angry flush on his cheeks instantly drained away, leaving his face a sickly shade of gray. What are you talking about? He stammered, his bravado faltering. My company is fine. We are just going through a temporary restructuring phase. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through his pathetic lies. A temporary restructuring phase. Is that what you are telling Patricia and Brittany to keep them swiping those maxed-out credit cards? Because the federal bankruptcy court in the Northern District of Illinois calls it something entirely different. I held up my phone, the bright screen displaying a highly confidential legal filing. Let me read this to you just so we are all on the same page. I stated, my voice ringing out with the authority of a judge delivering a final sentence. Notice of Chapter 11 Bankruptcy Filing. The primary lender has officially initiated hostile bankruptcy proceedings against your holding group due to multiple severe defaults on commercial real estate loans. The bank seized your operational accounts last Thursday. Your credit lines are frozen. Your assets are locked. You are broke, Richard. You are completely and utterly bankrupt. Patricia let out a blood-curdling shriek. She grabbed her husband's arm, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Richard, tell me she is lying. Tell me this is just another one of her vindictive little games. We have the gala next month. We have the country club fees. You told me the business was securing a new round of funding. He lied to you, Patricia. I interjected, refusing to let him spin another web of deceit. There is no new funding. In fact, the bank was so desperate to offload his toxic debt that they tried to package his bad loans and sell them at a massive discount to private equity firms. The proposal actually landed on my desk at HV Holdings 3 days ago. My analysts reviewed his portfolio, and we passed. We passed because your husband's business is a black hole of terrible investments and fraudulent accounting. It was not even worth buying for pennies on the dollar. The reality of their total financial ruin crashed down on the private dining room like a concrete vault. Patricia collapsed back into her chair, her hands covering her face as she began to hyperventilate. The illusion of her high society life, the country club memberships, the designer clothes, the lavish vacations, it was all gone, reduced to a pile of federal court documents and unpaid bank loans. Brittany stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing silently. The golden child, the aspiring socialite who had just lost her husband, her stolen luxury car, and now her entire financial safety net, looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. "But, Mom," Brittany whimpered, her voice cracking with pure terror. "How am I going to pay my credit card bills?" Terrence cut me off. "I need my allowance. You promised me you would cover my expenses until my lifestyle brand took off." "Your allowance," I snapped, turning my icy glare toward my sister. "Your allowance was funded by defrauding banks and stealing from your own family. The bank is going to audit every single transaction Richard made over the last 5 years. When they see the thousands of dollars he funneled into your personal accounts to fund your vanity projects, they are going to come after you too, Brittany. They will garnish whatever minimum wage paycheck you manage to scrape together to claw back their stolen funds." Richard sank into his chair, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at me, not as a father looking at a daughter, but as a defeated man looking at his executioner. "You knew," he whispered, his voice trembling with defeat. "You sat there this whole time, and you knew we were ruined." "I knew," I confirmed without a single ounce of pity. "I knew you were bankrupt. I knew you stole my corporate vehicle. I knew you manipulated Terrence. And I sat here waiting for you to dig your own graves deep enough so that you could never crawl back out." I picked up my designer clutch and signaled to the waiter who had been hovering nervously outside the heavy oak doors. "We are finished here," I announced. My grandmother Beatrice gracefully stood up, smoothing out her elegant tweed skirt. She looked down at Patricia and Richard with an expression of sheer, unadulterated disgust. "You two are a profound disappointment to this family," Beatrice stated, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You tried to play the game of wealth, and you failed spectacularly. You have no one to blame but your own toxic greed." Beatrice turned to me, offering a small, proud smile. "Shall we go, Tara? I believe the air in here has become far too polluted with desperation." "Yes, grandmother," I replied, offering her my arm. As we walked out of the private dining room, leaving my parents and my sister to drown in the chaotic panic of their impending financial and legal doom, I paused at the doorway. I looked back at the spilled red wine soaking into the white tablecloth, mirroring the absolute destruction of their fake lives. "By the way, Patricia," I said, my voice floating back into the room like a final death knell, "I am not paying for this dinner. Since you are so fond of keeping things in the family, you can figure out how to settle the bill with your maxed-out credit cards. Have a wonderful evening." The heavy doors clicked shut behind us, sealing them inside their own nightmare. 3 days passed since the restaurant incident. The silence from my family was entirely predictable. They were licking their wounds and realizing the absolute finality of their bankruptcy. I was sitting in my corner office at HV Holdings, 50 stories above downtown Chicago, reviewing a highly sensitive merger acquisition file, when the private security alert chimed on my encrypted tablet. The notification was highly specific, indicating an unauthorized entry detected at my personal penthouse residence in the Gold Coast district. I did not panic or reach for the phone to call building security. I simply swiped the screen and brought up the high-definition live feed from the hidden cameras, integrated seamlessly into the architecture of my home. There they were, Patricia and Richard. My parents had somehow retained an old physical emergency key to the service entrance of my building from years ago before I upgraded the main security protocols. They had bypassed the concierge entirely, sneaking in like common criminals through the freight corridors. Watching them stumble into my pristine living room was like observing two desperate feral animals backed into a corner. They looked disheveled, stripped of their usual country club arrogance, and driven entirely by panic. Patricia immediately began pacing around the expansive living room, her face contorted in an ugly display of bitter jealousy. She dragged her hands along the custom Italian leather sofa and glared at the original modern artwork hanging on the walls. Her envy was palpable, even through the digital screen. Richard did not waste time admiring the expensive decor. He marched straight toward my home office, kicking the heavy mahogany door open with his wingtip shoe, leaving a scuff mark on the pristine wood. I tapped the audio icon, unmuting the live feed. Their voices filled my quiet executive office, broadcasting their desperate intentions. "Find the safe, Patricia." Richard barked, tossing stacks of files off my desk onto the hardwood floor with frantic energy. "Find the client ledgers, the bank routing numbers, anything we can use. She has to have something illegal going on. Nobody makes $500 million playing completely by the rules. We just need one piece of leverage to make her pay off our loans and back off the car situation." Patricia moved into the kitchen. I watched in mild amusement as my mother let her petty rage completely take over her actions. She grabbed a crystal vase I had purchased at a private auction in Milan and swept it violently off the marble countertop. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces across the floor. "Look at how she lives, Richard!" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing sharply through the empty penthouse. "She sits up here in a literal palace while we are about to lose our home. She is a selfish, ungrateful monster. She owes us this money. We gave her life and she treats us like garbage." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. Most people would have dialed emergency services the second they saw intruders trashing their home. A single phone call to the Chicago Police Department would have resulted in my parents being dragged out of my luxury building in handcuffs for breaking and entering. But calling the police right now would be a massive waste of their criminal potential. It would be entirely too merciful. I did not just want them arrested for a petty residential burglary. I wanted them to completely destroy themselves on a federal level. I watched Richard tearing through my filing cabinets, completely oblivious to the fact that all my legitimate corporate documents were secured in biometric vaults at my corporate headquarters. He was sweating profusely, his breathing ragged as he desperately searched for a financial lifeline to save his sinking brokerage firm. Then he stopped. His eyes locked onto the bottom drawer of my secondary desk. He ripped it open and pulled out a thick black leather binder. I smiled a genuine cold smile. My executive assistant had placed that specific binder in that exact drawer 2 days ago under my direct and highly calculated orders. It was a masterpiece of corporate bait designed specifically for a man as greedy and legally illiterate as my father. Richard threw the binder onto the desk and flipped it open rapidly. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages, his hands shaking. "Patricia, come here right now." He yelled, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer greedy triumph. Patricia hurried into the office, her expensive shoes crunching over the shattered crystal she had just broken. "What is it? Did you find her offshore bank accounts?" Richard tapped the documents with a shaking finger. "It is better than bank accounts, Patricia. These are bearer bonds and offshore escrow transfer agreements. It looks like high-yield commercial real estate contracts signed and ready for syndication. There are millions of dollars in unexecuted capital sitting right here. If we take these, we can leverage them at our bank to secure a bridge loan. We can save the brokerage firm. We can pay off the debts. She will not be able to report them stolen without admitting she kept unregistered securities hidden in her apartment. The absolute financial ignorance of my father never ceased to amaze me. He was staring at highly complex fabricated financial instruments designed specifically to look like a desperate man's salvation. Because he routinely engaged in shady business practices, he naturally assumed I did the exact same thing. He genuinely believed he had just stumbled upon the holy grail of corporate extortion. He thought he had outsmarted a venture capitalist who had anticipated his every single move. "Let us get out of here before her building security does a random sweep," Richard instructed, grabbing the heavy binder and shoving it into his leather briefcase. He snapped the brass lock shut with a sharp click. They hurried out of my home office, leaving behind a trail of pathetic destruction consisting of shattered glass, overturned chairs, and scattered useless papers. They slipped out the service elevator exactly the way they came in, clutching the stolen binder to their chests, like it was a winning lottery ticket. I watched the elevator doors close on the live feed, finalizing their departure. I reached forward and tapped the screen, saving the high-definition video and audio files directly to my encrypted cloud server. I did not feel a single ounce of violation fear or anger regarding my damaged apartment. I felt the profound cold satisfaction of a chess grandmaster watching an opponent willingly and enthusiastically walk onto a concealed landmine. They thought they had just secured the leverage needed to blackmail me and save their fraudulent lifestyle. They had no idea that the documents inside that black binder were meticulously crafted commercial poison. They were about to take those completely fake contracts directly to a federally insured bank to try and secure a fraudulent loan. And when they did, they would escalate their crime from simple residential burglary to a massive federal offense known as wire fraud and bank fraud. I locked my tablet, took one last sip of my coffee, and went back to reviewing my merger files. The trap was flawlessly set, and my parents were sprinting blindly toward the executioner's block. The black leather binder my father stole was not just a collection of random papers. It was a highly sophisticated piece of financial bait engineered by my top risk assessment analysts. I had instructed them to draft a dummy portfolio of commercial real estate syndication contracts. They looked incredibly authentic. They featured offshore escrow agreements, bearer bonds, and complex yield projections. But they were entirely fabricated. The routing numbers listed in those documents did not lead to hidden wealth. They were dead ends designed to trigger an immediate red flag in any federally insured banking system. To the untrained eye, or the eye of a desperate failing broker like my father, they looked like a golden ticket. To a federal bank auditor, they looked like a flashing neon sign screaming fraud. 48 hours after the break, Richard walked through the polished glass doors of a major commercial bank in downtown Chicago. I knew exactly when and where he went, because the dummy portfolio contained a digital tracking tag embedded in the QR codes printed on the margins of the contracts. My father marched into the commercial lending department with his chest puffed out, clutching my stolen binder like it was a shield against his inevitable ruin. He was operating under the delusion that he could secure a massive bridge loan to save his bankrupt brokerage firm. He sat across from a senior loan officer and began weaving a magnificent web of lies. I could picture the scene perfectly. He probably smoothed his expensive but unpaid tie and spoke with that booming, arrogant voice he used to intimidate his family. He presented the stolen contracts as his own proprietary assets. He claimed his firm was managing a highly exclusive offshore syndication, and he needed a short-term liquidity injection of $2 million to finalize a massive commercial acquisition. The loan officer, a man trained to spot inconsistencies, probably asked for collateral. And that was the exact moment my father sealed his own fate. He slid the black leather binder across the desk. He offered the fabricated documents as collateral for the $2 million loan. Richard did not just lie to a friend or borrow money from a relative. He walked into a federally insured institution and presented forged, stolen documents to secure capital. The moment the loan officer took that binder and began scanning the pages into the bank's digital system, my father crossed a massive legal threshold. By submitting those documents for a commercial loan, he triggered the use of interstate communication networks. He officially committed federal wire fraud and severe bank fraud. These are not slap-on-the-wrist offenses. These are federal crimes that carry mandatory minimum prison sentences. My father thought he was executing a brilliant white-collar maneuver. In reality, he was tying a concrete block to his own ankles and jumping into the deep end of the ocean. Sitting in my penthouse, I received a discreet encrypted notification on my secure monitor. The alert informed me that the routing numbers associated with the dummy portfolio had just been queried by an external banking network. The system worked flawlessly. The bank was attempting to verify the offshore escrow accounts Richard had just proudly presented to them. Naturally, the verification process immediately failed. The bank's automated risk management software flagged the routing numbers as non-existent and highly suspicious. A secondary review was instantly triggered. The loan officer excused himself from the meeting room, leaving my father sitting there with a smug smile, completely unaware that the bank's anti-money laundering division was already scrutinizing his application. When a federal bank detects a high-level fraud attempt involving millions of dollars, they do not just politely decline the loan application. They are legally mandated to file a suspicious activity report directly with federal authorities. The system operates with ruthless efficiency. The bank held on to the documents, telling Richard that the underwriting process would take a few days to clear, given the international nature of the assets. They smiled, shook his hand, and walked him out of the building. My father left the bank feeling like a conqueror. He probably called Patricia the second he hit the sidewalk, bragging about how he had outsmarted me and secured the funds to save their fraudulent lifestyle. He went home to celebrate his perceived victory, utterly blind to the invisible crosshairs now painted squarely on his back. He had no idea that the bank had already frozen his loan application. He had no idea that copies of his signature on the fraudulent collateral documents were being securely transmitted to federal investigators. He had no idea that by trying to blackmail me, he had handed the government a perfectly packaged, airtight case against himself. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and looked out over the Chicago skyline. The city lights glittered against the dark surface of the lake. I felt a profound sense of tranquility. For 33 years, Richard and Patricia had manipulated, stolen from, and belittled me. They had used their parental authority as a weapon to demand blind loyalty, while secretly draining my resources to fund their golden child. They believed they were untouchable because family covers for family. But I was no longer playing by their twisted rules. I did not have to scream or fight or beg for them to treat me with basic human respect. I simply stepped aside and let their own insatiable greed do all the heavy lifting. I gave them enough rope and they enthusiastically tied the noose themselves. The trap had closed. There was absolutely no way to undo the paperwork Richard had just signed. The federal machinery was now in motion, and it was only a matter of time before the authorities came knocking on the door of their suburban home to collect their due. The secure messaging app on my phone chimed precisely at 8 in the morning. It was a message from an unknown number, but the directness of the text gave away the sender's identity immediately. The message simply asked for 15 minutes of my time at a discreet coffee shop in the financial district. I knew it was Terrence. As a licensed real estate broker who clawed his way up the corporate ladder, he possessed a primal instinct for survival. The disaster at the restaurant had triggered his internal alarm bells, and he was smart enough to realize that the sinking ship he had married into was about to drag him straight to the bottom of the ocean. I arrived at the upscale cafe 10 minutes early, taking a corner booth shielded by frosted glass partitions. When Terrence walked through the door, his usual swagger was completely gone. He wore a sharp, tailored suit, but the dark circles under his eyes told the story of a man who had not slept in days. He scanned the room, spotted me, and slid into the leather booth across the table. He did not bother ordering a drink. He just leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly together. "I need to know the truth," Terrence said, his voice low and urgent. "I spent the last 48 hours quietly pulling public records on your father's brokerage firm. Everything you said at the restaurant was entirely accurate. The firm is facing a hostile Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The commercial properties they claim to own are deeply underwater. But whenever I try to confront Brittany about it, she completely breaks down, cries hysterically, and accuses me of not trusting her. I need to know exactly how deep this rot goes, because my real estate license and my entire livelihood are on the line. I took a slow sip of my espresso, evaluating the man sitting across from me. Terrence was ambitious, hardworking, and intensely practical. He had built a solid reputation in the Chicago real estate market through relentless grinding. He thought he was marrying into a high-society family that would elevate his business network. Instead, he had unknowingly handcuffed himself to a ticking financial time bomb. I actually respected his hustle, which was the only reason I agreed to this meeting. "You are a broker, Terrence," I replied, my tone entirely professional and stripped of any familial warmth. "You understand the concept of a facade. Your wife is the ultimate staged property. She looks pristine from the curb, but the foundation is completely hollow, and the title is severely compromised." Terrence clenched his jaw. "Tell me what she's hiding." "She keeps talking about a secret trust fund her grandmother set up for her. She says it unlocks when she turns 35, and we just need to weather this temporary storm until the capital becomes available." I set my coffee cup down and looked him dead in the eye. "There is no trust fund, Terrence. My grandmother Beatrice specifically structured her estate to bypass my parents, and she absolutely refused to leave a single cent to Brittany. Beatrice despises my sister's lack of work ethic. The trust fund Brittany keeps crying about is a complete and utter hallucination. She has zero assets. She has no hidden wealth. She does not even own the designer clothes in her closet. They are all financed on credit." Terrence dragged a heavy hand across his face, letting out a long, harsh breath. "I knew it. I knew the math was not adding up. She has been spending thousands of dollars a week on luxury spa treatments and high-end dinners, claiming she was networking for her lifestyle brand. I asked to see her business account ledgers, and she threw a glass vase at the wall. I married a ghost." "You did not just marry a ghost, Terrence," I corrected him, leaning slightly closer across the table. "You married a financial parasite. And unfortunately, the illusion of her wealth is not the worst problem you are currently facing." Terrence froze, his eyes locking onto mine with a sudden sharp fear. "What do you mean? What could possibly be worse than finding out my wife is broke and her family is bankrupt?" I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a slim manila folder. When Terrence stormed out of the restaurant, I had my security and financial team run a comprehensive background check on his household. It is a standard procedure I use before dealing with hostile corporate entities. I slid the folder across the table. "As a real estate broker, your personal credit score is your absolute lifeblood," I stated, watching his face pale as he stared at the closed folder. "You need immaculate credit to maintain your licensing and secure financing for your clients. Open that folder, Terrence. Look at page 3. Terrence opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the top document, which was a detailed summary of recent financial activities linked to his home address. He flipped to the third page, and the air seemed to physically leave his lungs. His skin went completely ashen, and his hands began to tremble violently. "This cannot be real," Terrence whispered, his voice cracking with pure disbelief. "This says I have 4 newly opened platinum credit cards maxed out to the absolute limit. It says I owe over $80,000 in unsecured debt. I never opened these accounts. I never applied for these cards. Look at the authorized user listed below your name," I instructed, my voice devoid of any pity. Terrence forced his eyes down the page. He read the name printed in stark black ink, and a look of absolute devastating betrayal washed over his features. "Brittany." He choked out the name like it was poison. "She used your social security number, Terrence," I explained, delivering the final fatal blow to his marriage. "While you were out working 80-hour weeks trying to build a future for your family, your wife was memorizing your personal identification details. She applied for high-limit credit cards using your flawless credit history. She bypassed the security checks, intercepted the mail, and quietly added herself as the authorized user. She has been funding her fake billionaire lifestyle by completely destroying your financial identity." Terrence sat completely paralyzed, staring at the paper that proved his wife had financially ruined him. In the state of Illinois, debt accrued during a marriage is generally considered joint debt, but identity theft is a federal crime. If you default on those $80,000, your credit score will tank, your real estate license will be suspended, and your career will be entirely over. I watched the denial fade from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. The loving husband who wanted to believe his wife was just misunderstood was instantly gone. In his place sat a ruthless businessman who had just discovered his partner had embezzled his life savings. "She stole my identity," Terrence stated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "She used my social security number to buy luxury handbags while telling me her parents were funding her business. She turned me into her personal bank." "Yes, she did," I confirmed, sliding the folder back toward my side of the table. "My family is a sinking ship, Terrence. They will drown anyone who tries to keep them afloat. They stole my car. They stole your identity. They are currently trying to steal from a federal bank. You are standing on the deck of the Titanic, and the water is rising fast. You need to decide right now if you are going down with them or if you are getting on a lifeboat." Terrence sat perfectly still, staring at the folder containing his ruined credit history. The chaotic energy of a betrayed husband evaporated completely. In its place, a cold, calculating survival instinct took over. He was a successful African-American real estate broker who had fought against systemic barriers his entire life to build a spotless professional reputation in Chicago. He realized with chilling clarity that his white wife had weaponized his flawless credit score to fund her delusions of grandeur while simultaneously driving a stolen commercial vehicle right into his driveway. He pushed the manila folder back across the table. "I am not going to federal prison for that toxic family," Terrence stated, his voice entirely stripped of emotion. "I am not going to let Brittany drag my name through bankruptcy court, and I am absolutely not going to lose my broker license because she decided to play billionaire with your corporate assets. You said you are setting a trap for them. I want to know exactly how I can guarantee I am not standing in the blast radius when it goes off." I leaned back against the leather booth, studying him. He was making the smartest decision of his entire life. "You secure your safety by providing me with undeniable leverage," I replied, my tone clinical and precise. "My legal team already has enough evidence to press charges against Brittany for grand theft auto. But I do not just want to prove she took the car. I want to prove she orchestrated a premeditated financial crime. I need concrete evidence that she knowingly and willingly falsified corporate documents." Terrence did not hesitate. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive. He placed it deliberately in the center of the table, right between my coffee cup and the folder of his ruined credit reports. "When you dropped the bomb at the restaurant, I knew I had to protect myself instantly." Terrence explained, his eyes locked onto mine. "I am a broker, Tara. I deal with contracts and liabilities every single day. The moment you said the BMW belonged to your venture capital firm, my blood ran cold. I knew I had been driving a stolen corporate asset, so I went straight to the auto shop where I had the car wrapped. I accessed the vehicle's integrated security and dashcam system. The system records interior cabin audio and exterior video simultaneously. Brittany did not know the cameras were always rolling." I looked at the silver drive, my interest genuinely piqued. "Tell me exactly what is on that drive, Terrence." Terrence leaned forward, keeping his voice low to ensure absolute privacy in the crowded cafe. 2 days before they presented that car to me as an anniversary gift, Brittany drove it to a strip mall parking lot in the suburbs. The interior camera shows her sitting in the driver's seat waiting. A man gets into the passenger side. The audio is crystal clear. Brittany hands him an envelope full of cash and a blank vehicle title transfer form. I felt a surge of predatory satisfaction. She hired a forger. She hired a professional. Terrence confirmed, his jaw tightening with disgust. The audio captures her explicitly instructing the man to forge your signature. She even handed him a printed copy of a public financial filing you signed last year, so he could trace the exact curvature of your handwriting. She told him you were the CEO of HV Holdings, and she needed the corporate transfer section filled out flawlessly so the DMV would not flag it. The camera recorded the man practicing your signature on a notepad before signing the official title. It recorded the cash changing hands. It recorded the entire premeditated felony from start to finish. I picked up the USB drive, feeling the cool metal against my palm. This was the silver bullet. This was the irrefutable evidence that would upgrade my sister's actions from a simple family dispute to a meticulously planned corporate forgery and fraud case. This is exactly what I need, I stated, slipping the drive into my designer tote bag. Now tell me your terms. Terrence straightened his posture, projecting the sharp negotiation skills that made him a top-tier broker. I'm handing you the murder weapon, Tara. In exchange, I want absolute legal immunity from your corporate lawyers. I want a binding written guarantee that your firm will explicitly exclude me from the stolen vehicle police report. I will not be named as an accomplice. I will not be charged as an accessory after the fact. I did not know the car was stolen, and I am providing state evidence to prove it. I want to walk away from this marriage and this entire fraudulent family with my criminal record completely clean. I considered his terms. They were highly rational and mutually beneficial. I have no interest in destroying a man who was conned by the same people who tried to destroy me. I agreed, my voice ringing with total authority. My legal team will list you as a cooperating witness, not a suspect. You will face no charges regarding the commercial vehicle. But my immunity comes with one non-negotiable condition. Name it, Terrence said without missing a beat. You must go back to your luxury apartment and look your treacherous wife in the eye, I instructed, laying out the final phase of my strategy. You will pretend you are simply angry about the embarrassment at the restaurant. You will let her cry and manipulate and beg for your forgiveness. You will not mention the identity theft. You will not mention the maxed-out credit cards. And you absolutely will not file for divorce yet. Terrence frowned, his hands clenching into fists at the thought of returning to a woman who had financially ruined him. You want me to play house with a criminal? Why? Because the trap I set for Richard and Patricia is currently unfolding inside a federal bank. I explained, my eyes narrowing with intense calculation. My parents just walked into a commercial lending department with a binder full of fabricated offshore securities. They are currently committing federal wire fraud. The FBI and the IRS will be launching a coordinated investigation within the next 48 hours. If you confront Brittany about the identity theft today, she will panic. She will call her parents. They will realize their entire house of cards is collapsing, and they might attempt to flee or destroy additional evidence before the federal agents secure the perimeter. I paused, letting the gravity of the federal investigation sink into his mind. I need them comfortable, Terrence. I need them to believe they still have time. I need Brittany to believe her marriage is salvageable so she stays exactly where she is. You must maintain absolute silence until I give you the signal. When the federal authorities drop the hammer on Richard and Patricia, you will have my full permission to serve Brittany with divorce papers and hand her over to the police for the identity theft. Terrence absorbed the brutal efficiency of my plan. He realized he was not just dealing with an angry sister. He was dealing with a woman who orchestrated destruction on a federal level. He nodded slowly, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. I can play the angry but forgiving husband for a few more days. Terrence agreed, extending his hand across the table. You have a deal, Tara. Burn them all to the ground. I reached out and shook his hand. It was a cold, calculated transaction between two pragmatic professionals. Terrence stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the coffee shop, returning to the illusion of his marriage. I sat alone in the booth, the USB drive secured in my bag, knowing the final countdown to my family's absolute ruin had officially begun. The phone call from the commercial lending department came exactly 72 hours after my father strutted into the bank. I knew it happened because my internal security system flagged a massive spike in frantic digital communication between Richard and Patricia. I was sitting in my penthouse reviewing the latest quarterly projections when I allowed myself to imagine the sheer terror draining the color from my father's face. The senior loan officer did not call to congratulate Richard on securing a $2 million bridge loan. He called to deliver a localized apocalypse. The bank representative informed my father that the underwriting department had rejected the application entirely. But the rejection was just the appetizer. The main course was the terrifying revelation that the compliance division had flagged the bearer bonds and offshore escrow agreements as highly sophisticated fraudulent instruments. The loan officer spoke with the rigid monotone of a man reading a legally mandated script. He informed Richard that the institution had immediately frozen his commercial accounts and officially submitted a suspicious activity report to federal regulatory agencies. My father dropped his phone onto the kitchen counter of their heavily mortgaged suburban home. He did not yell. He did not throw things. The crushing weight of impending federal prosecution paralyzed him completely. Patricia walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of unpaid utility bills and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw her husband's face. He looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner reach for the lever. "She set us up," Patricia Richard choked out, his voice barely a hollow rasp. "The contracts in that black binder, they were fake. The bank flagged them as fraudulent securities. They froze the accounts. They notified the authorities. Tara knew we would break into her office. She planted that binder specifically for us to steal and present to a federally insured institution. We just walked straight into a wire fraud investigation." Patricia dropped the mail. The bills scattered across the expensive hardwood floor they could no longer afford. The grand illusion of their high society life shattered into a million jagged pieces. There was no more denying the reality of their situation. They were not just bankrupt anymore, they were staring down the barrel of a multi-year federal prison sentence for bank fraud. "Tara is a monster," Patricia shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. "She is trying to destroy her own parents. She planned this to put us behind bars. We have to hire a defense attorney right now. We need the best legal representation in Chicago to fight this." "With what money?" Patricia Richards shouted, finally snapping out of his paralysis. "The brokerage firm is dead. The bank accounts are frozen solid. We do not even have the liquidity to pay the grocery delivery service, let alone a high-powered federal defense attorney. We are completely out of options." Just then, the front door slammed shut. Brittany marched into the kitchen, her face streaked with ruined designer mascara. She had just come from her luxury apartment where Terrence was playing his part flawlessly. Following my strict instructions, Terrence had returned home acting distant and cold, but maintaining the illusion of a salvageable marriage. He gave Brittany just enough silent treatment to make her panic about losing her lifestyle, but not enough to make her realize he already knew about the identity theft. "Terrence is acting like a complete stranger," Brittany sobbed, throwing her expensive handbag onto the counter. "He will not even look at me. He says he needs time to process the humiliation at the restaurant. If I do not get some cash to smooth things over and prove to him that our family is still wealthy, he is going to walk out the door. You have to give me my allowance right now. I need to buy his forgiveness." Patricia grabbed her golden child by the shoulders, her manicured nails digging into Brittany's designer jacket. "There is no allowance, Brittany. There is no money. Your sister just framed us for a federal crime. The bank is investigating your father. We are about to lose the house and we might go to prison." Brittany stopped crying instantly. The absolute severity of the situation finally pierced through her impenetrable bubble of vanity and narcissism. The three of them stood in that sprawling, unpaid kitchen, completely cornered by their own greed. They had no allies. They had no cash. They had no escape route, unless they created one. Patricia released Brittany and began pacing the length of the kitchen floor. Her eyes darted around frantically as her survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life manipulating situations to her advantage, and she was not about to let a federal investigation end her reign without a brutal fight. If Tara was untouchable, they needed a target who could not fight back. They needed a massive injection of capital to hire a legal team and flee the fallout. There is one asset pool left, Patricia stated, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. A massive, completely unencumbered asset pool that could pay off the debts, fund the defense lawyers, and set us up for the rest of our lives. Richard looked up, his eyes narrowing. You cannot possibly mean your mother. Beatrice hates us. She wrote us out of the primary operational control years ago. She would rather burn her commercial real estate empire to the ground than hand us a single dollar to save our lives. She will not have a choice, Patricia countered, a wicked, desperate smile forming on her lips. She is 78 years old. She is elderly. She is vulnerable. And she is currently spending an awful lot of time with the exact same granddaughter who just supposedly committed corporate sabotage against her own family. Brittany wiped her face, her greedy instincts aligning perfectly with her mother's dark vision. What are you saying, Mom? Are we going to ask Grandma for a loan? She will just laugh in our faces. We are not going to ask her for anything, Patricia declared, her plan solidifying with terrifying speed. We are going to take it all. We are going to file an emergency petition in family court for a full medical conservatorship. We will claim that Beatrice is suffering from severe cognitive decline and early onset dementia. We will tell the judge that Tara is using her background in venture capital to financially abuse a vulnerable senior citizen. Richard stood up straight, the sheer audacity of the plan breathing new life into his desperate lungs. You want to declare your own mother mentally incompetent and seize control of her estate. It is brilliant, Brittany chimed in, her eyes lighting up with the prospect of unlimited wealth. If we get the conservatorship, we freeze Tara's access to Grandma's accounts. We take over the properties. We use the estate funds to pay off our debts and hire the best lawyers to crush Tara's fake fraud setup. We can save everything. They gathered around the kitchen island, a trio of absolute predators backed into a corner. They had just decided to launch a vicious legal assault on an elderly woman simply to cover up their own crimes. They were preparing to walk into a courtroom and lie under oath to strip a brilliant, fiercely independent matriarch of her human rights. They thought they had just invented the perfect escape plan. They thought they could outmaneuver me by attacking my grandmother. They had no idea that Beatrice and I were already holding the match, ready to drop it on the very courtroom they planned to use against us. The emergency court summons arrived at my corporate headquarters exactly 4 days after the bank rejected my father's fraudulent loan application. I was sitting in a board meeting when my executive assistant interrupted to hand me a thick manila envelope delivered by a court-appointed process server. I excused myself, stepping into my private office to review the documents. The sheer audacity of the paperwork was staggering even for my parents. Patricia had officially filed a petition in the family court, requesting an involuntary and immediate medical conservatorship over my grandmother Beatrice. The legal filings were a masterpiece of absolute fiction. Patricia and Richard had hired a discount litigator, a desperate attorney willing to file frivolous motions for a cut of a perceived payout. Reading through the sworn affidavits, I could almost hear my mother's hysterical victim routine transcribed into legal jargon. The petition claimed that Beatrice was suffering from severe advanced cognitive decline and early onset dementia. Patricia painted a tragic picture of a frail, disoriented elderly woman who could no longer manage her own basic hygiene, let alone a massive commercial real estate empire. But they did not stop there. A conservatorship petition requires a villain, and my parents happily cast me in the role. The second half of the document was entirely dedicated to character assassination. Patricia accused me under penalty of perjury of committing egregious elder financial abuse. She claimed I was using my background in venture capital to systematically isolate Beatrice from her loving family. The affidavit stated that I was manipulating a mentally incapacitated senior citizen, coercing her into signing over deeds transferring offshore accounts, and draining her life savings to fund my own corporate ventures. Their goal was ruthlessly transparent. By filing an emergency injunction, they were attempting to legally mandate an immediate freeze on all of Beatrice's financial assets and real estate holding accounts. They formally requested that the judge strip me of any power of attorney or executive proxy I held within her companies. Patricia petitioned to be appointed as the sole legal conservator, arguing that only a devoted daughter could protect the estate from a predatory granddaughter. They wanted to lock me out, seize the keys to the kingdom, and use my grandmother's billions to pay off their federal bank fraud liabilities before the federal agents kicked their front door down. I did not throw the documents across the room. I did not scream. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed my grandmother's private number. Beatrice answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and entirely lucid. "They filed the petition, grandmother," I stated simply, walking over to my floor-to-ceiling windows. "They are requesting a full conservatorship. Patricia claims you are suffering from severe dementia, and that I am actively embezzling your estate." A sharp, aristocratic laugh echoed through the receiver. Beatrice did not sound like a frail victim. She sounded like a general who had just been handed the enemy's battle plans. "I assumed they would try something this desperate," Beatrice replied, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "Your mother has always possessed a profound lack of imagination, combined with a terrifying amount of greed. She truly believes a cheap lawyer and a few fake tears in a courtroom will be enough to strip me of my human rights. I am having my driver bring me to your estate right now," I informed her, grabbing my coat. "We need to brief the legal team." "Do that," Tara Beatrice commanded, "and tell the lead counsel to prepare for a public execution. I want them destroyed in open court." An hour later, I sat across from Beatrice in the formal library of her sprawling mansion. My grandmother was dressed impeccably in a tailored tweed suit, her posture straight as an arrow, her mind sharper than a scalpel. Sitting beside us was our lead defense attorney, a high-powered litigator who charged thousands of dollars an hour and specialized in destroying frivolous wealth grabs. The attorney reviewed the petition, sliding the pages across the polished antique desk. "They are filing for an emergency ex parte hearing." He explained, his expression a mix of professional amusement and mild disgust. "They want to rush this in front of a judge before we have time to mount a proper medical defense. They are hoping the sheer volume of their accusations regarding elder abuse will force the judge to freeze the accounts as a protective measure. If the accounts freeze, Patricia will immediately petition for an allowance to manage your supposed care, which she will undoubtedly divert to her own massive debts." Beatrice folded her hands, resting them on her lap. "Let them have their expedited hearing. I want this handled swiftly and brutally." I leaned forward, aligning my strategy perfectly with my grandmother's ruthless vision. "We have the medical evaluations ready," I confirmed, looking at the attorney. "For the past 5 years, I have mandated that Beatrice undergo comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluations every 6 months by 3 independent board-certified specialists. We have a mountain of irrefutable medical evidence proving she possesses the cognitive function of a woman half her age." "That is an excellent foundation," Tara the attorney agreed, making a quick note. "But a medical defense is standard. If we want to truly dismantle their credibility, we need to prove malicious intent. We need to prove this petition is a fraudulent cash grab to cover their own impending legal doom." I smiled, sliding a silver USB drive across the desk. "I am always 10 steps ahead. This drive contains the high-definition security footage and audio recordings from when Patricia and Richard broke into my penthouse. It captures them specifically discussing their massive debts, their failing brokerage firm, and their desperate need to secure capital. It proves they are financially ruined and acting purely out of malice." Beatrice picked up her teacup, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "We will let Patricia take the stand. We will let her weep and play the devoted, heartbroken daughter. We will let her perjure herself completely. And then, Tara, you and I will walk into that courtroom and bury them alive." The trap they thought they had set for us was actually a cage they had built for themselves. Patricia and Richard were about to walk into a federal courthouse entirely unprepared for the absolute devastation we had meticulously prepared for them. They thought they were hunting a vulnerable old woman and her greedy granddaughter. They had no idea they were walking straight into the jaws of a corporate slaughterhouse. The courtroom in downtown Chicago felt remarkably sterile for a place where families routinely tore each other apart. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone that perfectly matched the cold clinical execution I was about to witness. I sat at the respondent's table with my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Beside me, my grandmother Beatrice sat like a reigning monarch holding court. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and a string of authentic South Sea pearls, looking absolutely regal and entirely unbothered by the legal circus unfolding around us. Across the aisle, sitting at the petitioner's table, were my parents and my sister. Patricia and Richard had clearly scraped the absolute bottom of the legal barrel to find representation. Their attorney was a sweaty, disorganized man in an ill-fitting beige suit. His briefcase was overflowing with loose papers, and he kept adjusting his cheap tie as if the collar of his shirt was slowly choking him. He was a discount litigator who clearly took this case on the delusional hope of scoring a massive contingency fee from a billionaire estate. He had no idea he was walking into a massacre. The judge, a stern-faced woman with no patience for theatrics, called the emergency ex parte hearing to order. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the sprawling petition Patricia had filed. "Your Honor," the cheap lawyer began, his voice wavering slightly as he tried to project authority. "We are here today to save a vulnerable elderly woman from severe financial exploitation. My clients, Patricia and Richard, are filing for an immediate medical conservatorship over Beatrice to protect her estate from a predatory granddaughter who has weaponized her background in venture capital to isolate and drain her own grandmother." The lawyer gestured dramatically toward me. He painted a ridiculous fictional portrait of a ruthless corporate shark who had swooped in and manipulated a helpless dementia patient. I did not react. I simply watched him perform, noting every single lie he entered into the official court record. Every falsehood was another nail in their collective coffin. The lawyer then called his star witness to the stand. Brittany stood up from her chair, executing a flawless display of manufactured fragility. She wore a modest pastel dress that was completely out of character for her, clearly chosen to make her look innocent and pure. However, she could not resist carrying her luxury designer handbag to the witness stand, a glaring contradiction to the bankrupt reality she was desperately trying to hide. Brittany placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth under penalty of perjury. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and immediately began producing the most Oscar-worthy crocodile tears I had ever seen. "Please tell the court about your recent interactions with your grandmother," the discount lawyer prompted, feeding her the rehearsed script. Brittany let out a loud, shuddering sob. She covered her face with her hands, letting her shoulders shake before looking up at the judge with wide, tragic eyes. "There have not been any recent interactions, Your Honor," Brittany cried, her voice trembling with fake devastation. "My sister Tara has completely locked us out. She hired private corporate security guards to stand outside Grandma's estate. She changed all the access codes. She will not even let us bring flowers or check on her health." The judge leaned forward, peering over her glasses. "When was the last time you actually spoke with your grandmother?" Brittany sniffled, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "It was 2 months ago. I managed to get past the gate when the security guards were changing shifts. I just wanted to bring Grandma her favorite pastries. I walked into the garden, and she was sitting there staring blankly at a brick wall. I walked up to her and said, 'Hi, Grandma, it is Brittany. And Your Honor.' She just looked right through me." Brittany paused for dramatic effect, letting a fresh wave of fake tears spill over her eyelashes. She looked at me with completely empty eyes and asked who I was. She asked me if I was the new maid. My own grandmother did not recognize me. She was so confused and scared. She kept asking where her husband was, and my grandfather has been dead for 20 years. It broke my heart into a million pieces to see her mind completely gone. I sat completely motionless, but internally, I was marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. The garden visit she was describing never happened. Brittany had not visited Beatrice's estate in over 3 years because Beatrice had explicitly banned her from the property after catching her trying to steal vintage silverware. The story was a complete fabrication entirely constructed to hit the required legal markers for cognitive decline and mental incompetence. While Brittany delivered her monologue of pure fiction, I watched my parents. Patricia had her face buried in a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking in a performance of maternal grief that belonged on a theater stage. Richard sat rigidly looking down at his hands, projecting the image of a strong father broken by family tragedy. They were a synchronized unit of deception. They had rehearsed this entire routine in the desperate hope that a judge would grant them immediate emergency control over Beatrice's banking infrastructure. They needed that injunction today. They needed the court's permission to freeze my authority so they could wire millions of dollars to their creditors before the federal bank fraud investigation concluded. But Brittany was not finished. The discount lawyer guided her to the next phase of their coordinated attack. "And what role does your sister Tara play in this tragic situation?" the lawyer asked, feigning deep sympathy. Brittany pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Tara is a monster. She knows Grandma is losing her mind, and she is using it to steal everything." Tara forced Grandma to sign over corporate vehicles to her venture capital firm. She made Grandma transfer the title of a luxury BMW just to hide assets from the family. When my parents found out and tried to intervene, Tara threatened to have us arrested. She is draining the accounts while Grandma sits in that big house completely isolated and terrified. Tara even destroyed my marriage. My husband left me because the extreme stress of watching my sister abuse my grandmother was tearing our entire family apart. It was a masterful web of deceit. She took the reality of the stolen BMW, the reality of Terrence leaving her, and the reality of their bankruptcy, and twisted it all into a narrative where I was the villain and they were the noble saviors. Patricia and Richard sat at their table, dabbing their eyes with tissues, nodding along in tragic agreement. The judge took detailed notes, her expression unreadable. To an outsider, Brittany's performance was incredibly convincing. The tears looked real. The panic sounded genuine. The story tapped into the very real fear of elder abuse that family courts deal with every single day. The discount lawyer concluded his direct examination and sat down, looking incredibly smug. He truly believed he had just secured a massive payday. I turned my head slightly to look at Beatrice. My grandmother was calmly taking a sip from her glass of ice water. She placed the glass back on the table, folded her hands, and gave me a microscopic nod. The petitioners had officially dug their grave. They had committed egregious perjury in a federal courtroom. They had laid all their fake cards on the table. The performance was over, and it was finally time for us to bring down the hammer. The discount lawyer finally concluded his direct examination and took his seat, practically beaming with unearned pride. He nodded at Patricia and Richard as if they had just won the lottery. The judge turned her severe gaze toward our table. She asked if the defense had any cross-examination or if we wished to call our own witnesses. Our lead attorney stood up slowly, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket. He was a partner at a top-tier Chicago law firm specializing in high-stakes estate litigation. He did not carry a messy briefcase. He only held a single sleek tablet. He approached the center of the courtroom with the lethal grace of an apex predator. "Your Honor, we have no questions for the current witness," our attorney stated, his voice resonating with absolute authority. Her testimony was a masterclass in creative fiction, but it requires no cross-examination. Instead, the defense calls Beatrice to the stand. A collective gasp rippled through the petitioner's table. Patricia gripped Richard's arm, her knuckles turning white. Brittany scrambled down from the witness box, her fake tears instantly drying up as she realized the woman she had just declared a mindless vegetable was about to testify. My grandmother stood up, smoothing her charcoal blazer. She did not need a walker or assistance. She walked to the witness stand with the formidable posture of a corporate titan who had spent 50 years crushing weak men in boardrooms. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath in a crisp, unwavering voice, and took her seat. She looked directly at the judge, her eyes sharp and terrifyingly clear. "Mrs. Beatrice," the judge began, her tone noticeably softening into respect. "Your daughter and granddaughter have testified that you are suffering from advanced cognitive decline. They claim you do not recognize your own family members. How do you respond to these allegations?" Beatrice smiled, a razor-thin expression that held absolutely zero warmth. "Your Honor, I recognize my family members perfectly well. I simply choose to ignore them because they are insufferable, greedy parasites. I am 78 years old, not dead. I run a commercial real estate empire spanning 3 time zones. My mind is sharper than every single person sitting at the petitioner's table combined." Our attorney stepped forward, handing a thick bound folder to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit A. These are comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluations conducted less than 48 hours ago. They were performed by 3 independent board-certified specialists from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The results show that Beatrice operates in the 99th percentile for cognitive function, memory retention, and executive decision-making for her age demographic. She does not have dementia. She does not have Alzheimer's disease. She is in perfect psychological health." The judge flipped through the medical reports, her eyes widening at the impeccable credentials of the doctors who signed them. She looked down at Patricia and Richard, her expression darkening into a scowl of judicial fury. Our attorney did not give them a single second to recover. He pressed the attack relentlessly. "Your Honor, the petitioners did not file this conservatorship because they care about an elderly woman. They filed it because they are desperate. They are completely bankrupt and currently facing a massive federal investigation for bank fraud. They fabricated this entire medical crisis to seize my clients' assets and pay off their toxic debts. And we have the digital evidence to prove it." Our attorney tapped his tablet. The large flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls instantly flickered to life. The high-definition security footage from my penthouse filled the screens. The timestamp showed the exact date and time. Every person in the courtroom watched as Patricia and Richard used a stolen key to sneak into my secure luxury apartment. They watched Patricia violently sweep my expensive crystal vase off the kitchen counter, shattering it across the floor in a fit of bitter jealousy. They watched Richard kick open my office door and violently ransack my desk, throwing confidential files everywhere like a desperate thief. But the video was just the beginning. The audio was crystal clear, echoing through the silent courtroom and completely destroying any remaining illusion of their innocence. "Find the safe, Patricia!" Richard's voice boomed from the speakers, frantic and greedy. "Find the client ledgers, the bank routing numbers, anything we can use. We just need one piece of leverage to make her pay off our loans and back off the car situation." Then came Patricia's shrill, undeniable voice. "Look at how she lives, Richard. She sits up here in a literal palace while we are about to lose our home. She is a selfish, ungrateful monster. She owes us this money." The video continued, showing Richard discovering the black leather binder, the exact binder I had planted as bait. It captured his exact words as he planned to use the fabricated offshore documents to secure a fraudulent bridge loan. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a documented felony broadcasted in federal family court. Our attorney paused the video, freezing the frame on Richard's greedy, triumphant face. Then he played a second audio file. This one was recorded directly from a hidden microphone Beatrice had installed in her own sunroom after she caught Brittany trying to steal silverware years ago. It was a recording of Patricia and Richard standing outside Beatrice's estate, discussing their ultimate plan. "If the bank loan falls through, we execute the backup plan," Patricia's recorded voice hissed coldly. "We tell the judge the old woman has lost her mind. We get the conservatorship. We freeze Tara's authority. Once we control the estate accounts, we wire the funds to our creditors and claim it was for Beatrice's medical care. The old bat will not even know what hit her." The audio recording clicked off, leaving the courtroom in a state of absolute shocked silence. The air had been completely sucked out of the room. The discount lawyer hired by my parents sat frozen at his table. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the tracks of an oncoming freight train. He slowly slid his chair away from Patricia and Richard, literally attempting to distance himself from the radioactive perjury his clients had just committed under oath. He knew his legal career was effectively over for submitting fraudulent evidence to a sitting judge. Patricia covered her mouth with trembling hands, letting out a high-pitched sound of pure terror. Richard gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles white, his face drained of all color. They had walked into this courtroom believing their tears and their lies would grant them access to billions. Instead, they had just watched themselves confess to burglary, extortion, and a conspiracy to commit elder abuse on high-definition video. Brittany sat frozen beside them, her designer handbag clutched to her chest. The fake tears from her earlier testimony were completely gone, replaced by the very real, horrifying realization that her parents were about to go to prison and she was going to be left with absolutely nothing. Her luxurious lifestyle was entirely over. Beatrice leaned forward into the microphone, her voice cutting through the silence like a diamond-tipped blade. "Your Honor, as you can clearly see, I am not the victim of a predatory granddaughter. I am the target of a bankrupt, fraudulent daughter and a pathetic son-in-law who thought they could use this court as an ATM machine. I request that you dismiss this frivolous petition immediately with extreme prejudice." The judge slammed her gavel down with terrifying force. The sound cracked through the room, echoing the absolute destruction of my family's pathetic scheme. The echo of the gavel snapping against the wooden block sounded like a gunshot. The judge glared down at the petitioner's table with a level of judicial rage that made the discount lawyer physically shrink into his chair. "Your Honor." The discount lawyer stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic squeak. "We were not aware of this video evidence. My clients assured me that their concerns for the estate were genuine. However, we still believe that Tara exercises undue influence over the financial assets. Our lead attorney did not even wait for the judge to reprimand the man. He simply stepped forward and placed a thick leather-bound portfolio onto the judge's bench. Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit B for the official court record, our attorney stated, his voice echoing with absolute finality. The petitioners have repeatedly claimed that my client Tara is a financial predator. They have perjured themselves by stating she is a low-level employee, desperate for cash, who needs to embezzle from her grandmother to survive. This narrative is not just false, it is mathematically absurd. The judge opened the portfolio. The courtroom held its collective breath. I watched my parents leaning forward, their eyes wide with fearful anticipation. Brittany gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Exhibit B contains certified audited financial disclosures from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service. Our attorney continued, projecting his voice so every single person in the gallery could hear the absolute truth. Tara is the sole founder and chief executive officer of HV Holdings. She is a venture capitalist managing a portfolio with over $500 million in active assets. Her personal net worth is comfortably in the 9 figures. She owns commercial skyscrapers, tech startups, and international logistics firms. The portfolio contained more than just tax returns. It held the articles of incorporation for HV Holdings, the certified capitalization tables, and the international investment portfolios. Our attorney read the figures aloud, letting the hundreds of millions of dollars echo off the wood-paneled walls. He detailed my recent acquisition of a major medical technology firm and the successful initial public offering of a software company I had seed-funded 3 years prior. Every single word he spoke was a devastating blow to the fragile egos of the people sitting across the aisle. The air left the room. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, actually gripping her throat as if she could not breathe. For 33 years, she had told her friends I was a boring failure. She had forced me to take on her debt because she thought I was a pathetic pushover. Now she was staring at legally binding federal documents proving her discarded daughter was a financial leviathan. Richard looked like a deflated balloon. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the wealthy patriarch, the successful broker. Hearing that his daughter could buy and sell his entire existence before lunch broke his mind completely. He had threatened to fire me from a bankrupt company while I was literally controlling a $500 million empire. And Brittany was hyperventilating. She had spent her entire life chasing rich men, leasing luxury cars she could not afford, and buying fake designer bags to look wealthy. She had alienated her husband Terrence to keep up a facade. She had mocked me for taking an Uber. She had stolen a commercial vehicle thinking it was just a family hand-me-down. And all along, her own sister was an actual legitimate nine-figure venture capitalist. The sheer agonizing regret on Brittany's face was worth every single second of this miserable trial. She had no idea she was poking a sleeping dragon with a toothpick. My attorney turned to face my parents, his expression filled with professional disdain. Tara does not need to manipulate an elderly woman for money. She makes more in a single fiscal quarter than Richard and Patricia have earned in their entire combined lifetimes. The idea that a $500 million venture capital director would need to steal from her grandmother's checking account is frankly an insult to basic accounting. The judge flipped through the certified tax returns and bank statements. She looked at the staggering numbers printed on the federal documents, and then looked down at my parents. The sheer magnitude of their lie was now fully exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse. "You brought a fabricated medical crisis into my courtroom," the judge began, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "You wasted the time of this court. You committed blatant perjury on the witness stand, and you did it all in a pathetic, transparent attempt to steal from an elderly woman to cover up your own financial ruin." The judge turned her blazing eyes toward the discount lawyer who was sweating so profusely, his cheap beige suit was visibly stained. "Counselor." The judge snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "You filed an emergency ex parte petition based entirely on malicious fabrications. You put a witness on the stand to deliver rehearsed perjured testimony. You failed to conduct even a basic level of due diligence regarding the financial standing of the accused. You have made a mockery of the judicial system today." The lawyer stood up, his knees visibly shaking. "Your Honor, I was misled by my clients. I had no idea the medical claims were fraudulent." "Ignorance is not an excuse for suborning perjury in my courtroom," the judge roared, leaning over the bench. "You are legally responsible for the filings you submit. Effective immediately, I am holding you in direct civil and criminal contempt of court. I am assessing a $50,000 punitive sanction against you personally. Furthermore, I am drafting a formal referral to the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. I will personally ensure your license to practice law is permanently revoked. You will never set foot in a courtroom again." The lawyer collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His career was instantly obliterated. He had bet his entire livelihood on a quick payout from my family, and he had lost everything. The judge picked up her pen and began signing the dismissal orders with aggressive, forceful strokes. "This petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice," the judge declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "The petitioners, Patricia and Richard, are permanently barred from filing any future motions regarding the estate or medical care of Beatrice. I am also ordering the petitioners to pay all legal fees and court costs incurred by the defense." My parents sat in stunned silence. They had walked into the courthouse expecting to be handed the keys to a billion-dollar empire. Instead, they had been publicly humiliated, mathematically destroyed, and slapped with catastrophic legal fees they could never hope to pay. They had no company left. They had no money left. And now they had absolutely no legal recourse. Beatrice stood up, smoothing her blazer with elegant precision. She did not look at her daughter. She did not look at her son-in-law. She simply linked her arm through mine and turned toward the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. "We won. We had systematically dismantled their entire plot without breaking a single sweat. But the execution was not quite over. The judge had handled the civil matter of the conservatorship perfectly. However, the federal crimes my parents committed when they broke into my penthouse and walked into that commercial bank were entirely outside the jurisdiction of family court. The real punishment was waiting just outside the courtroom doors. We pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the expansive marble hallway of the federal building. The air out here felt infinitely cleaner. My grandmother Beatrice walked beside me with her head held high, completely unbothered by the dramatic scene we had just left behind. We had won the battle, but the actual war was about to conclude right here on this polished floor. Behind us, the courtroom doors violently swung open again. Patricia and Richard stormed out, followed closely by a hyperventilating Brittany. They were practically vibrating with humiliated rage. My father marched toward us, his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. He raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You think this is over, Tara?" Richard yelled, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet judicial corridor. "You think you can just buy a fancy lawyer and humiliate us in front of a judge? I will file an appeal before the end of the day. I will call the newspapers. I will tell everyone in Chicago how you manipulated the system to steal from your own family." I did not even break my stride. I simply turned around and looked at him with absolute pity. "You are not going to file an appeal, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "And you are certainly not going to call any newspapers. In fact, you will not be making any phone calls at all for a very long time unless they are collect calls from a federal penitentiary." Patricia let out a harsh, mocking laugh, preparing to hurl another barrage of insults at me. But her voice died in her throat as a group of 5 individuals stepped out from the shadows of the marble pillars. They were not court bailiffs or local police officers. They were dressed in sharp, dark suits, wearing tactical earpieces, and carrying an unmistakable aura of absolute authority. Gold badges gleamed brightly against their belts. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely stoic expression, stepped directly into my father's path, blocking his advance. "Richard and Patricia!" The agent spoke with a commanding voice that demanded immediate compliance. "I am Special Agent Davis with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." My father stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked rapidly, his arrogant country club demeanor trying to reassert itself against the sudden presence of federal law enforcement. "FBI," Richard stammered, trying to force a confident chuckle. "There must be some kind of mistake. We were just leaving a family court hearing. You have the wrong people. We are prominent business owners in this city. There is no mistake, Richard," Agent Davis replied, reaching to his belt and unhooking a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "You and your wife are being placed under arrest for multiple federal offenses, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and grand larceny. Furthermore, you are being charged with breaking and entering and the destruction of private property regarding your unauthorized entry into a residential penthouse earlier this week." The color instantly vanished from my mother's face, leaving her looking like a hollowed-out mannequin. She looked wildly from the federal agents to me, and finally the devastating reality crashed down upon her. The fake offshore contracts, the $2 million commercial loan application, the hidden cameras in my apartment. It had all been a meticulously orchestrated trap, and she had dragged her husband right into the center of it. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Agent Davis ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. 2 other agents stepped forward to flank my mother. "No!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "You cannot do this! We are wealthy. We have connections. Tara, tell them to stop. Tell them it was just a family misunderstanding. We were just trying to save our house. I cannot go to jail. I have a gala to attend next week." An agent firmly grabbed Patricia's arm, twisting it behind her back with practiced efficiency. The harsh metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the hallway sounded like the ultimate symphony of justice. Patricia wailed uncontrollably, kicking her expensive heels against the marble floor as she was forcefully restrained against the cold wall. She looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of all her fake glamour and reduced to a sobbing criminal. Richard did not fight. He simply collapsed inward. The imposing patriarch who had bullied me my entire life, who had threatened to destroy my career just days ago, suddenly looked like a terrified, helpless old man. His knees buckled slightly as the agents roughly pulled his arms behind his back and secured the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. He stared at the floor, completely broken by the overwhelming power of the federal government. He finally realized that his cheap manipulation tactics meant absolutely nothing against a federal indictment. Brittany stood just a few feet away, completely paralyzed by sheer horror. She clutched her luxury handbag to her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. She watched her parents, the two people who had enabled her entitlement and funded her delusions, being treated like common street criminals. The golden child was entirely alone now. She had no safety net, no stolen car, and no parents to bail her out. The agents began to march my handcuffed parents down the long corridor toward the freight elevators. As they passed by me, Richard slowly raised his head. His eyes were filled with tears of pure defeat. "Tara, please." Richard begged, his voice a pathetic whimper. "You have to help us. We are your family." I looked at the man who had stolen my college fund and the woman who had forced me into massive debt. I felt no sorrow. I felt no obligation. I felt the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of a predator watching its prey get exactly what they deserved. "You stopped being my family the day you decided my future was entirely expendable." I replied, my voice echoing with icy finality. "You wanted to play corporate games with my assets." "Welcome to the major leagues, Richard. I hope you look good in an orange jumpsuit." I turned my back on them, linking my arm through my grandmother's. We walked toward the main exit, the sounds of my mother's hysterical sobbing fading away behind us. We had just orchestrated the absolute destruction of their toxic empire, and we did not even have to lift a finger to do it. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office. I stood looking out over the Chicago skyline, feeling a profound sense of tranquility. It had been less than 24 hours since Patricia and Richard were escorted out of the federal courthouse in handcuffs. The local news cycle was already having a field day with the story. Prominent suburban real estate brokers arrested for federal wire fraud. It was a spectacular public downfall, and I enjoyed my premium matcha latte while reading every single headline scrolling across my digital monitor. My executive assistant knocked sharply on the heavy glass door of my office. She stepped inside, her usually impeccable professional demeanor slightly rattled. She informed me that there was a highly aggressive individual causing a massive disturbance at the ground floor security desk. Before she could even finish her sentence, the private elevator reserved exclusively for senior executives dinged softly in the reception area. Security protocols at my firm are flawless, but sheer manic entitlement can occasionally bypass a keycard swipe. Brittany had apparently slipped past the lobby guards by tailgating a group of visiting tech executives and screaming at the top of her lungs that she was the sister of the chief executive officer. I walked out of my private office into the expansive reception area. The space was designed to intimidate. It featured imported Italian marble, sleek minimalist furniture, and original modern artwork. Standing right in the middle of this corporate sanctuary was Brittany. She looked absolutely unhinged. The perfectly curated socialite persona had completely vanished. Her designer coat was wrinkled and haphazardly buttoned. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her expensive mascara was smudged down her cheeks from an entire night of crying. She was clutching a crumpled piece of paper, which I recognized immediately as a standard federal bail bond form. "Tara!" Brittany screamed the moment she saw me. Her shrill voice shattered the quiet professional atmosphere of the executive floor. Several of my senior financial analysts stepped out of their glass-walled offices to watch the spectacle unfold. I stood my ground, radiating absolute unbothered authority. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of embarrassment. I simply crossed my arms and looked at her as if she were a piece of trash that had blown in from the rainy street. "You need to write a check right now," Brittany demanded, marching toward me with frantic, aggressive steps. The federal magistrate set their bail at $2 million each. Their bank accounts are entirely frozen. The house is locked down by federal investigators. I spent the entire night calling every single person we know, and nobody will lend us a dime. You have to post their bail, Tara. You have to get them out of that federal holding facility today. I looked down at the crumpled bail bond form she was shaking in her hand, and then looked back up at her tear-streaked face. I felt a surge of pure clinical amusement. "You broke into a highly secure corporate financial facility to demand $4 million in bail money for two federal criminals," I stated, my voice echoing coldly through the marble lobby. "Your delusion is truly a medical marvel, Brittany. They are our parents." Brittany shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "They are sitting in a concrete cell because of you. You set them up. You planted those fake documents to ruin their lives, and you did not even care that you were destroying our family. You are a cold-blooded sociopath, Tara. You manage $500 million. $4 million is absolute pocket change to you. Write the check and get our mother out of jail right now." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing her to instinctively back away. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was staggering. Even now, after witnessing the absolute destruction of their fraudulent empire, she still believed I was their personal automated teller machine. She genuinely thought she could march into my place of business and order me to finance the freedom of the very people who tried to destroy me. "Let me explain exactly how reality works in the adult world, Brittany," I said, articulating every word with razor-sharp precision. "I did not force Richard and Patricia to steal my spare key. I did not force them to break into my private residence. I certainly did not force them to walk into a federally insured commercial bank and present fabricated offshore securities to a loan officer. They committed those severe felonies with absolute enthusiasm because they were greedy and desperate." I paused, letting my words sink into her panicked brain. "And regarding their bail," I continued, my tone devoid of any empathy or warmth, "I would not give you $4 to buy them a cup of coffee, let alone $4 million to secure their release. They are exactly where they belong. They spent 33 years emotionally abusing me, stealing my assets, and prioritizing your vanity over my basic survival. I am not going to finance their freedom. I am going to sit in my corner office and watch the federal government prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law." Brittany let out a loud, dramatic sob, dropping to her knees right there on the marble floor. She tried to grab the hem of my tailored trousers, but I stepped back swiftly, avoiding her touch like a highly contagious plague. "You cannot do this to me, Tara," Brittany wailed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I have nothing left. The bank seized my credit cards this morning. The dealership came and towed the BMW away because it was reported stolen. I cannot even buy groceries. You have to help me. I am your sister. We share the same blood." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman on the floor. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sisterly obligation. Just the cold, hard truth that she was finally experiencing the real world, without a financial safety net to catch her. "We share blood," I agreed, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But we do not share anything else. You called me a failure. You stole my commercial vehicle. You conspired to strip our grandmother of her human rights just to maintain your fake wealthy lifestyle. You are a parasite, Brittany, and the Bank of Tara is permanently closed." I turned to my head of security, who had just arrived via the private elevator with two large, heavily armed guards. "Escort this woman off the premises," I ordered, without looking back at my sister. "If she resists or attempts to enter this building ever again, have the Chicago police arrest her for criminal trespassing." Brittany scrambled to her feet, screaming hysterically as the security guards firmly grabbed her arms. She hurled insults and curses, calling me a monster and a demon as they dragged her toward the elevator doors. She blamed me for tearing the family apart, completely blind to the fact that her own greed was the explosive that brought the entire structure down. Just as the elevator doors were about to open, a tall, sharply dressed man stepped out from the adjacent glass conference room. He had been waiting there patiently for his scheduled meeting with me. Terrence adjusted his bespoke suit and looked directly at his wife being restrained by my corporate security team. The timing was absolutely flawless. Terrence stood in the center of the marble lobby, looking like an executioner in a bespoke suit. He had watched the entire hysterical performance through the soundproof glass of the adjacent conference room, and now he stepped into the open air to deliver the final killing blow. Brittany stopped fighting against the security guards the moment her tear-swollen eyes landed on her husband. A spark of pure, desperate hope ignited across her ruined face. She genuinely believed her savior had just arrived. She thought the man she had manipulated and financially bled dry for years was stepping forward to rescue her from the consequences of her own horrific actions. "Terrence, baby, please, Brittany!" shrieked her voice, cracking as she desperately tried to reach out to him. "You have to tell Tara to let me go. You have to help me get Mom and Dad out of federal holding. My sister has gone completely insane. She is trying to destroy our family. We need to hire lawyers, Terrence. You have to wire the bail money right now before the media gets a hold of the story. Tell her to call off her security guards." Terrence did not rush to her side. He did not offer a comforting embrace or a reassuring word. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps, his expensive leather shoes echoing sharply against the imported Italian marble floor. His face was an absolute mask of cold, unyielding contempt. The loving, supportive husband who had worked 80-hour weeks to provide for his wife was entirely gone. In his place stood a ruthless real estate broker who had just surgically excised a malignant tumor from his life. He stopped just 2 feet away from her. The 2 massive corporate security guards maintained their firm grip on Brittany's arms, but loosened their hold just enough to let the marital confrontation unfold. The entire executive floor was dead silent. Every financial analyst and administrative assistant stood frozen behind their glass walls, watching the spectacular destruction of my sister's fake billionaire lifestyle. "I am not wiring a single cent to anyone," Brittany Terrence stated, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register that sent a visible shiver down my sister's spine. "I am not hiring defense attorneys for your fraudulent parents, and I am absolutely not saving you from your sister. In fact, I came here today specifically to meet with Tara and finalize my full cooperation with her corporate legal team." Brittany's jaw dropped. The spark of hope in her eyes instantly died, replaced by a profound, sickening confusion. "What are you talking about? We are married, Terrence. We are supposed to be a team. You have to protect me. Protect you." Terrence let out a harsh, humorless laugh that cut through the lobby like a whip. "You want me to protect the woman who systematically destroyed my financial identity while I was sleeping in the same bed? You want me to protect the woman who smiled in my face while committing federal identity theft?" He reached inside his tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out a checkbook. He did not pull out a handkerchief to dry her fake tears. He pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with the official stamp of a top-tier Chicago family law firm. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the heavy envelope directly at Brittany's chest. It hit her and fell to the marble floor, landing right at her expensive designer boots. "Those are your divorce papers," Terrence announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "They have been officially filed and expedited. I have already secured a temporary restraining order freezing all of our joint assets, although we both know there is absolutely nothing left in those accounts anyway." Brittany stared down at the manila envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Terrence, no." She whimpered, her knees buckling slightly. "You cannot do this. We can fix this. I can explain everything." "Explain what exactly?" Brittany Terrence fired back, his professional composure finally cracking just enough to let his raw, visceral anger bleed through. "Explain how you memorized my social security number to bypass credit authorization checks." Explain how you secretly opened 4 different platinum credit cards under my name without my knowledge or consent. Explain how you racked up over $80,000 in unsecured debt to buy fake designer handbags and fund luxury spa retreats while telling me you were networking for a business that never even existed. Brittany began to hyperventilate. The security guards had to tighten their grip to keep her from collapsing completely onto the floor. She looked wildly from Terrence to me and then back to Terrence, realizing the absolute magnitude of the trap she had walked into. I trusted you. Terrence continued, taking one final step closer to deliver the absolute truth. I am a black man working in the most competitive real estate market in this country. I had to fight 10 times harder than anyone else to build a flawless credit score and an impeccable professional reputation. I thought I was marrying a woman who wanted to build an empire with me. Instead, I married a financial parasite. You intercepted the mail. You forged my signature on credit applications. You intentionally drove my pristine credit score straight to the bottom of the ocean just so you could pretend you were a rich socialite on the internet. You jeopardized my real estate broker license. You jeopardized my entire livelihood. You used me as a human shield for your pathetic insecurities. I did it for us. Brittany sobbed, offering the most pathetic excuse imaginable. I wanted us to look successful. I wanted to fit in with your wealthy clients. You did it for yourself, Terrence snapped, cutting off her pathetic rationalization instantly. You are exactly like your parents. You are a grifter. You are a fraud. And I am not going to let you drag me down into a federal prison cell just because you wanted to play pretend. I am cooperating fully with Terrace attorneys, and I have already filed a comprehensive police report regarding the identity theft. You are going to have to explain those $80,000 of fraudulent charges to a Judge, Brittany. I am not drowning with your fraudulent family. Terrence did not wait for her response. He did not need to hear another lie or another fake apology. He had delivered his verdict and executed his exit strategy flawlessly. He turned his back on his weeping wife and looked directly at me. He gave me a sharp, respectful nod of professional acknowledgement. I nodded back silently, confirming that our transaction was complete and his legal immunity was fully secured. Terrence adjusted his suit jacket, walked straight to the executive elevator, and pressed the down button. The doors opened, he stepped inside, and the doors glided shut, erasing him from Brittany's life forever. Brittany let out a guttural, agonizing scream. It was the sound of a woman who had just lost absolutely everything: her husband, her stolen wealth, her fake status, and her freedom. She thrashed against the security guards, her expensive heels slipping wildly on the polished marble as she tried to break free and chase after an elevator that was already gone. I watched her pathetic struggle with absolute clinical detachment. I lifted my premium matcha latte to my lips and took a slow, satisfying sip. The beverage was perfectly hot, the flavor incredibly rich. I lowered the cup and looked at the head of my security detail. "We are done here," I stated, my voice cutting through my sister's hysterical sobbing with icy precision. "Get this trash out of my building. Throw her out the front doors. If she tries to step foot on this property again, call the Chicago Police Department and press charges for trespassing." The 2 massive guards nodded. They lifted Brittany completely off her feet, dragging her kicking and screaming across the lobby toward the service elevators. Her wails echoed down the hallway, a chaotic symphony of pure financial and social ruin. I turned around, walked back into my corner office, and closed the heavy glass door, leaving the noise of my broken family permanently outside. The federal justice system moves with a slow crushing inevitably that absolutely does not care about country club memberships or high society illusions. 6 months after the dramatic arrest in the courthouse hallway, the reality of federal prosecution finally concluded for my parents. The sentencing hearing was a masterpiece of legal destruction. Patricia tried her usual manipulation tactics, crying to the federal judge about being a misunderstood mother who was just trying to help her family survive a tough economy. She wore a modest gray sweater and kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue, hoping to secure a lenient sentence. The judge, a veteran of financial crime cases, was entirely unimpressed. He read aloud the transcript of their recorded conversation from my penthouse, highlighting their explicit intent to commit bank fraud and their disgusting plot to exploit an elderly woman. The gavel came down with absolute finality. 36 months in a federal penitentiary. The judge denied their request for minimum security placement and ordered immediate remand. I sat in the back of the courtroom with my posture perfectly straight, watching the bailiffs secure the heavy metal chains around my father's waist. Richard looked utterly broken, a pathetic shell of the arrogant patriarch who once threatened to ruin my career. As they shuffled through the side door toward the holding cells, they did not look like prominent Chicago socialites. They looked exactly like the desperate thieves they truly were. I did not offer them a final wave or a tearful goodbye. I simply checked my diamond watch and walked out of the building to attend a board meeting. Once they were officially incarcerated, their fake empire imploded entirely. The bank moved swiftly to foreclose on their sprawling suburban home. This was the same house where they had belittled me, where they had schemed to steal my college fund, where they had worshipped their golden child. The property went up for public auction to settle their massive outstanding debts. Naturally, I could not resist the opportunity for a final strategic acquisition. I did not buy it personally to live in. I used a commercial subsidiary of HV Holdings to purchase the foreclosed estate for absolute pennies on the dollar. Purchasing their foreclosed home was a calculated business decision dripping with poetic justice. The bank was thrilled to offload the toxic asset to my holding company. I made sure the demolition was scheduled on a brisk autumn morning. I hired the loudest, most aggressive demolition crew in the city. I stood on the sidewalk drinking a premium iced matcha latte as the heavy yellow bulldozers smashed through the grand entrance. The mahogany doors, the expensive kitchen where they had plotted against my grandmother, it all crashed down into a pile of worthless rubble. The dust settled over the manicured lawn, ruining the pristine landscaping my parents had obsessed over for decades. Within 2 weeks, the entire lot was leveled entirely cleared of debris and paved over with thick black asphalt. My contractors painted bright yellow lines and installed automated ticketing booths. Transforming their monument of fake wealth into a paved commercial parking structure was not just a financial victory. It was the ultimate physical erasure of their toxic legacy. Every time a commuter pays $20 to park their car on the exact spot where my mother used to insult my wardrobe, my venture capital firm registers a profit. I turned my childhood trauma into a highly lucrative passive income stream. While our parents traded their luxury sheets for prison cots, Brittany faced her own personalized apocalypse. Terrence executed his exit strategy with flawless precision. He finalized the divorce rapidly, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of the debt she had fraudulently accrued in his name. To avoid federal prison for identity theft and wire fraud, Brittany was forced to accept a brutal plea deal from the state prosecutors. The court mandated that she pay back every single cent of the $80,000 she had stolen. The judge garnished her wages and ordered her to secure immediate full-time employment or face immediate jail time for violating her probation. Brittany's descent into the working class was incredibly steep and absolutely unforgiving. With a felony fraud conviction permanently attached to her background check, her employment options were severely limited. Corporate offices would not even look at her resume. High-end retail boutiques rejected her the moment her criminal record flagged in their systems. She was completely blacklisted from the luxury world she had desperately tried to conquer. The stolen BMW had long been returned to my corporate fleet, and her luxury apartment building had evicted her for non-payment. She was forced to move into a tiny run-down apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, sharing a single cramped bathroom with 3 other struggling roommates. The golden child who once demanded $4 million in bail money was now clipping coupons just to afford basic groceries. A year later, my chauffeur was driving me to a commercial real estate viewing in the outer suburbs. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I requested a brief stop at a local fast food franchise to grab a bottle of sparkling water. The black Maybach glided smoothly into the drive-through lane of the depressing neon-lit restaurant. I sat in the spacious rear cabin, reviewing a digital contract on my tablet. My driver lowered the tinted privacy window to accept the beverage. I glanced up from my screen just as the cashier reached out the service window to hand over the receipt. There stood Brittany. The faux fur coats and designer dresses were completely gone. She was wearing a cheap, hideous polyester uniform shirt stained with old grease and smelling faintly of stale French fries. A highly unflattering hairnet completely covered her previously flawless blonde hair. Her hands, which used to sport expensive weekly manicures, were now raw and red from washing industrial kitchen equipment. She held a plastic cup in one hand and a few crumpled dollar bills of change in the other. When her tired, defeated eyes focused on my face through the open car window, the color instantly drained from her cheeks. She froze, completely paralyzed by the humiliating reality of our positions. She was standing in a cramped, humid kitchen, earning minimum wage to pay off a massive criminal debt. I was sitting in the back of a $500,000 chauffeur-driven vehicle, wearing a custom-tailored suit and managing a global financial empire. She did not scream. She did not beg for help or hurl insults. She simply lowered her head, her shoulders slumping in total, absolute defeat. She handed the cup and the receipt to my driver without uttering a single word. Her spirit was entirely broken, crushed under the weight of her own miserable choices. I did not smile. I did not offer a smug remark. I just tapped the button on my armrest. The tinted glass glided silently upward, cutting her off entirely from my world. As the heavy luxury car accelerated away from the greasy drive-through window, I went back to reading my commercial contracts, leaving my sister to clock back in for the rest of her miserable shift. The drive back to the heart of the city was smooth and completely silent. I did not look back at the suburban wasteland or the fast food restaurant where my sister was currently scrubbing grease off the floor. I directed my driver to take the scenic route along Lake Michigan. The water was a deep, churning blue, reflecting the absolute calm that had finally settled over my entire existence. For 33 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my parents' expectations and my sister's endless entitlement. Now that weight was entirely gone. I felt lighter than air. My driver pulled into the secure underground garage of my residential skyscraper in the Gold Coast district. I took the private express elevator straight to the top floor. The steel doors glided open to reveal my penthouse bathed in the magnificent golden light of the late afternoon sun. My grandmother Beatrice was already there waiting for me on the expansive wraparound balcony. She sat in a plush armchair wrapped in a luxurious cashmere shawl looking out over the breathtaking Chicago skyline. The sky was painted in brilliant strokes of crushed violet, burnt orange, and deep crimson. It was a spectacular sunset that mirrored the fiery destruction and subsequent rebirth of our reality. I walked out onto the terrace and took the seat across from her. My private chef had prepared a delicate spread for our afternoon meeting. A rare vintage Darjeeling tea steamed gently in a hand-painted porcelain teapot resting on the glass table between us. Beatrice poured the tea with the steady, elegant hands of a woman who had successfully defended her empire against invaders. She handed me a delicate cup and saucer. Her eyes met mine, holding a depth of mutual understanding that required absolutely no verbal explanation. We did not speak about Patricia or Richard sitting in their federal prison cells. We did not mention Brittany washing dishes for minimum wage. They were eradicated from our lives, and they no longer warranted a single second of our precious time or mental energy. There was no toxic forgiveness hovering in the air between us. Society loves to push the narrative that you must always forgive your family simply because you share the same genetics. People will tell you to be the bigger person, to turn the other cheek, to let go of the anger so you can heal. But Beatrice and I understood the brutal truth about toxic forgiveness. Forgiving unrepentant parasites does not bring you peace. It only gives them a brand new opportunity to attach themselves to your success and drain you dry all over again. We did not shed any pathetic tears for the family we had lost. You cannot mourn the loss of something that never actually existed. I never had a loving mother or a supportive father. I had two financial predators who viewed my existence purely as a stepping stone for their golden child. Crying over their imprisonment would be an insult to the billion-dollar sanctuary I had built to protect myself from them. I took a slow sip of the warm, fragrant tea. The bustling noise of the city streets was entirely muted from this altitude. Up here on the 75th floor, there was only the gentle evening breeze and the intoxicating scent of absolute limitless power. We had excised the cancer from our bloodline. We had used our intellect, our capital, and our complete lack of mercy to secure our borders. Beatrice looked out at the skyscrapers towering over the financial district. "We built a beautiful fortress, Tara," she stated, her voice serene and filled with quiet pride. "And we made absolutely sure the drawbridge is permanently drawn up." I nodded in agreement, setting my teacup down on the saucer with a soft clink. "It is the most secure fortress in the world, grandmother." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the city in twilight, I turned my attention away from the skyline and looked directly forward. I thought about the thousands of women who might be watching this right now. Women who are currently drowning under the crushing expectations of manipulative parents. Women who are working themselves to the bone to fund the lifestyles of ungrateful siblings. Women who are told they are difficult or unlovable simply because they refuse to be convenient victims. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Family is not defined by the people who use the excuse of blood ties to manipulate and drain you. Sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to disrespect your boundaries, steal your peace, or treat your bank account like their personal emergency fund. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. If your family views your success as a threat rather than a triumph, you owe them nothing. If they only call you when they need a favor or a financial bailout, you owe them nothing. You have the absolute right to protect your peace, your assets, and your sanity with ruthless precision. Do not let society guilt you into tolerating abuse wrapped in the guise of family loyalty. You must be brave enough to strike the match and burn those rotting bridges to the ground. Let the structures of manipulation and guilt completely collapse into ashes. Do not fear the destruction, because the blazing light from that fire will illuminate the exact path you need to take. It will guide you toward a future where you are valued, respected, and entirely free. You hold the power to write your own ending. Use it. If my journey from being a discarded daughter to an untouchable force of nature resonated with you, I want you to hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel to join a community of strong, independent individuals who refuse to be victims of their own families. Share this story with anyone who needs the courage to finally walk away from the people holding them back. Your peace is your most valuable asset. Protect it at all costs. The most profound lesson we can extract from this journey is that sharing DNA does not automatically grant someone a lifelong VIP pass to your life, your peace, or your hard-earned success. Society constantly feeds us the dangerous narrative that family is everything, and that we must endlessly forgive the people who share our bloodline regardless of how terribly they treat us. But toxic forgiveness is nothing more than a permission slip for abusers to continue their exploitation. When we look at how easily a family can prioritize their own greed and social status over the basic well-being of their own daughter, it becomes incredibly clear that loyalty must be earned through consistent, mutual respect. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep manipulative people warm. True empowerment begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. Building a successful life often requires making the difficult decision to walk away from the very people who were supposed to protect you. It means recognizing that your worth is not defined by their inability to see it. It is about understanding that setting ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an essential act of self-preservation. You have the absolute right to protect your mental health, your financial stability, and your future from anyone who views you as a mere stepping stone or a safety net for their own reckless choices. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can ever do is to strike a match, and burn a rotting bridge to the ground, because the light from that fire will finally illuminate the path you were always meant to walk. If you found strength in this message, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who needs the courage to finally choose themselves today.